So if you're able to cast your mind back about 65 years, or imagine a terraced house, imagine a terraced house with a closed backyard. There are two stories connected to this backyard, and they involve the same people, my big brother and myself. As the stories unfold, you will begin to see that they are in some ways on the opposite ends of the spectrum of resourcefulness. I have lived in Belfast all my life. I am now 74 years old. So these stories happened when I was about 10 and my brother was 13. There were 5 in our family, and we first lived in the Holy Land. And if you're from Belfast, you will know that I'm not referring to Israel or Palestine, etc., but to the area of Belfast where the streets are named after places in the Middle East. Jerusalem Street, Palestine Street, Damascus Street, etc. We lived in Damascus Street, where playing with a ball presented a danger. Damascus Street was on a hill that sloped towards the River Lagan. So if you were playing with a ball, it could quite easily run down the hill and into the River Lagan. Recovery was never an option. During this time, I attended All Saints Primary School, but sadly, sainthood was never achieved. We later moved to a bigger house and found ourselves living in an attic house in Melrose Street. One big brother, one big sister, and I was the baby of the family, still am. This house had a closed-in backyard with an outside toilet and a coal shed where about 5 bags of coal would be dumped by the coalman. There was also a small shed next to the bog where my dad kept his bicycle. The yard was not very big, but it did give my brother and I some space in which to kick a ball. We were home alone late one afternoon. My mother had died of cancer when I was 9. We were playing heady tennis in the yard. Now, heady tennis was very popular then, but sadly it has never found its way into the Olympics. And with the present discussions ongoing about brain damage while heading a ball, it is unlikely to become popular again. If you've never played heady tennis, then think about volleyball, only using your head instead of your hands. The ball is headed over the net and the opponents must head it back again. If you fail to get it over the net, then your opponent gets the point. It was normally played in school with about 5 to 6 aside and played on a badminton court. We played just one aside, me and my big brother. The net was the rope tied across the yard. I also need to tell you a little bit about the ball. You see, in 1957, plastic footballs were very expensive, and we just did not have one. So at our wee backyard tournament, the ball was a thick rubber ball and had the ability to bounce very high. I think you know where this is going. The game proceeded quite well, and if my memory is correct, the scores were even. It was my big brother who headed the ball over the net. I missed it. Now, he disputes this version of events, but it did hit the edge of the kennel, and the ball's ability to bounce was activated, and it went through the kitchen window. In today's world, it would be called the living room. There was a stunned silence, followed, I think, by a few bad words, only because my dad wasn't home from work yet. What were we going to do? Well, the first thing to do was to clear up the glass. This we did on the outside, and then on the inside where the dining room table was close to the window. The window had 2 panes, and it was the bottom pane that was broken. We had a net curtain over the bottom half of the window because you didn't want anybody peering in from the houses in the other street. So now the discussion started. How are we going to tell my dad? You see, money was tight, and he was trying to raise 3 children on a very basic shipyard wage. This might mean a good hiding for us, if you know what I mean. It could certainly put a stop to our pocket money for a few weeks. So after much discussion and some disagreement, we made the wise decision not to tell him. You see, we thought the curtain would hide the damage. The decision really was at that lower end of the spectrum of resourcefulness. Now, I know what you're thinking. Surely he will find out eventually. But you see, children tend to live in the now. and the future is not really a big concern. Well, not until it's found out. So as we sat down to tea, my brother, my sister, and my dad, we discussed the usual things. What happened in school that day? Did we have any homework to do? Also, of course, the traffic on the way home from the yard, as in Harland and Wolff. The meal progressed for quite some time until a very slight breeze began to blow, and it was just enough to lift the curtain to reveal a large football-sized hole in the window. I can still see my dad's face today as he stood and looked at the window and how this curtain had lifted. He knew there were probably a few drafts, but this was something else. It was then time to come clean and own up to the incident, which I believe resulted in a stop to our pocket money. I think we avoided the hiding. Now, my second story features the same house. It features the same people and the same backyard. If you thought the first story was the lower end of the spectrum, then this one is the higher end of resourcefulness. Although we were often home alone, we were actually never given a key to the house. My dad never liked the idea of a key on a string hanging behind the front door. So our key was given to a neighbour, believe it or not, called Mrs. Keys. I promise I did not make that up. However, when Mrs. Keys gave us the key, it was our responsibility to return it to her as soon as possible so that it was available the following day. This did not always happen. So on some occasions, there was no key available from Mrs. Keys. One day when the key was not available, I needed access to our house. I decided to climb over the wall into the backyard. The yard was about 8 feet high. The yard wall was about 8 feet high, just over 2.3 meters in new money. But to a fit boy, this was not much of a challenge. The school bag was left in the back entry. The wall was scaled. The back door opened, school bag retrieved. The next challenge was to get into the house through the scullery window. This meant lifting the lower sash window and climbing in over the gas cooker. Not an easy task, as I found out to my cost. As I lifted the bottom window, the top window dropped down and trapped my 2 hands. I was rescued by my next door neighbour, who heard my cries for help. After telling my brother the eventful story, he came up with a very resourceful plan to solve the problem. He was always the brainy one. Our back door to the yard had a mortise lock, the type of lock that is buried actually into the wood of the door, and it was secured by a key. We never took the key out of the lock. It was always turned to lock the door and the key left in place. But unknown to my dad, my big brother took the key out one day and cut a slot in the end of the key with a hacksaw. And then an old screwdriver was then left on the windowsill, so that any time in the future when we climbed over the yard wall, it was a simple case of delicately slipping the screwdriver into the slot, turning the key the opposite way to open the door. And I don't think my dad ever found out. We may have been on the lower end of the resourceful spectrum on one occasion, but definitely on the higher end with a slotted key, which solved our difficulty when we were home alone.